Hi everyone, my name is Sean Waldheim, and I have the distinct honor and privilege of introducing you and to 7 phenomenal incoming, current, and recent core members, and their stories really are the center of today. So I'll be very brief, but just to tell you a bit about myself, again, my name is Sean. I was a 2000 Greater New Orleans core member. I taught high school science. I've worked on Teach for America staff for the last 13 years, first as a program director in the Bay Area, and more recently leading the admissions team. This session features the firsthand stories of 7 incoming, current, and recent core members who have all made the decision to teach. And we're going to look at that. There we go. And joining this fight for educational equity is a deeply personal matter, and it's an extension of who each of us are as people. Now, I very strongly believe that all of us are unified by some beliefs. One of those beliefs is that all children in this country have a right to receive an excellent education. Yet, when we actually think about that belief and understand what that means for each of us, that belief becomes very personal. It's an extension of who we are as people. It's an extension of our individual stories. In fact, I suspect as each of you have done this work, your beliefs have likely become more complicated. They've probably become more nuanced. This work has become more personal. I remember when I joined the Corps in 2000, I had, if you asked me my opinion on different topics, I would have had a couple sentence answers. If you were to ask me my views on those same topics several years later, those sentences would have become pages. And even though we're all working toward the same vision, there's no single story of Teach for America. And that's why I think it's so important that we're all grounding ourselves in the stories of each other, and knowing that each of our stories is different, and that each of our stories has an incredible amount of value. Now, by exploring the stories of incoming, current, and recent core members, I invite each of us to explore our own story. What brought you here? How does that inform your work every day? Whether you're in the classroom, whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or a principal. And what fuels your work, particularly when it's hardest? So as you're hearing these different stories, I hope that each of you is also asking yourself, what does this tell me about my own story? What brought me here? Now, given what this work requires, I just think it's essential that each of us is clear on why we're here and to revisit this question ongoing. We each have a personal why, and that personal why should be different for each of us, even though we're unified by some beliefs. That personal why should align to our own unique life histories, to our own unique sets of experiences and beliefs. So as an audience member, I anticipate that there will be a couple things that will happen for you today. One is, I think you'll likely just gently find yourselves reflecting on your own beliefs, on your own personal why. Why are you here? And what is it that sustains you in this very hard work, day in and day out? I suspect as you hear the different stories, you'll hear some points of similarity. I also suspect that you will hear points of difference. And this should be a reminder that as our collective community, we are made up of many unique stories, many unique perspectives, and many unique individuals. And that's actually a beautiful thing. And because storytelling is a way of knowing each other, I also hope that you'll gain a snapshot into different lived experiences within our community, and by doing that you'll feel a greater connection to each other. Storytelling should be something that is not only an individual thing, that brings us clarity about our own purpose, but our shared stories should help bring us together. And then finally, as you reflect on your story and on the stories of our community, I hope you'll consider the power of your story, both your individual story and our shared story, in moving us toward one day. I've often heard that people follow people. They don't follow ideas, and the way that we become people is we share our story. We actually paint a picture, and that is one of the most important things in our work as leaders. So a couple notes about how today will work. There'll be 7 vignettes. Those vignettes are going to be shared by different members of anyone from the 2012 to 2016 cores. We chose these individuals because we thought that they were very reflective and very thoughtful about their own stories, and we thought that that would give them something to really share with you all today. We also intentionally sought a diverse range of experiences. I'll introduce each speaker, and then after the vignettes, I'll bring all 7 of the speakers up here and ask them a couple of questions, because we really want to keep the focus on the stories. That will be the heart of this session. That's how we will spend the majority of our time. Therefore, the questions at the end, that time will be very brief, so there won't be time for audience questions, just because we really want to spend the majority of this session on each of the speaker stories. So, with no further ado, I will introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker is Jamie Gua. Jamie is a 2012 core member from South Dakota. She's currently the Talented and Gifted Director at Crazy Horse School. To tell you a little bit about Jamie, you'll notice for each of the speakers, I'm not going to share too much about their personal backgrounds because that's going to come out through their stories. So I'm going to stick to pretty biographical information. Jamie graduated from the Evergreen State College in Washington State, where she studied American Studies and North American Studies. After that, Jamie earned her master's at the University of Oklahoma, where she studied Native American Studies. Jamie holds many different important roles in many different spaces. She proudly serves on the Native Alliance Initiative Council. She's done that for 3 years. She was a semifinalist for the Suleiman Award in Teaching Excellence. She recently accepted a position on the first ever collective National Advisory Board. In Jamie's classroom, she teaches and focuses on student empowerment and advocacy. She facilitated a Design for Change project with her high school students, which was chosen in 2013 to be a representative for the United States in the Be the Change World Conference in India. Jamie currently lives on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, and she still teaches at her placement site at Crazy Horse School. So with no further ado, let me welcome Jamie up.
Yaniwashte, good morning. As Sean said, my name is Jamie Gua, and I am incredibly humbled and honored to be here with you, and I thank you so much for listening to me and my story. As a little girl, my grandpa always used to tell me that if I get up before the sun, I can do anything. Which unfortunately didn't happen for me today because I think I had a little too much fun last night at the collective reception. I can tell by some giggles that I wasn't alone in that. But last night was really great, and just being here in general has been such a wonderful experience for me. And again, I just want to say I'm so blessed to share this space with all of you, and thank you so much. I want to begin by saying that I'm a second-generation reader. I hope some of you are wondering what I mean by that, and I hope you, hope, and I'm so happy that you asked, because let me tell you. My story begins with my grandmother, who at the age of 11 in 1924 was forced to attend boarding school. Some of you may be familiar with boarding schools, some of you might not. Some of you have maybe heard of the first boarding school called Carlisle Indian School, founded in 1879 by Richard Pratt and located in Pennsylvania. Some of you may also be familiar with Pratt's philosophy regarding Indian education, which centers around the notion, kill the Indian, save the man. This philosophy is centered around the idea that certain people, in this case American Indians, are seen as a square peg needing to fit into a round hole. Our culture, our heritage, our stories are what makes us different, which at this point in time was seen as a deficit. As a result of attending boarding school, my grandmother's identity was literally beaten out of her, and most of our native language, Interior Salish, was forgotten. She was taught how to be civilized by learning skills such as how to cook, clean, and read. However, she never really grasped the English language and spent most of her life struggling to read. Perhaps that was her way of resisting, of not giving up who she was. We'll never know. But try as they did, they never killed her fiercely independent spirit. My mother, a self-made woman, raised 3 daughters and put herself through college, being the first in our family to do so. To say that she's my idol is an understatement, but not just because she's a first-generation reader or the first in our family to attend college, but because she, like her mother, never stopped fighting. She never gave in. Now, I wish that I could say the philosophy of kill the Indian, save the man died with Richard Pratt, but it didn't. It has haunted me and followed me most of my life. I grew up on the Colville Indian Reservation and attended Pascal Sherman Indian School, where I have fond memories of learning geometry through basket weaving and studying star knowledge as part of my science curriculum. My school emphasized the importance of oral learning skills, and as a child, I developed the ability to focus and expertly comprehend and recall information as I listened to elders recite descriptive stories. I excelled in the classroom and worked hard to learn and exemplify traditions and values of my tribe. But when my family and I moved off the reservation to a town an hour south of Seattle, I was faced with a harsh reality. I was nearly 3 years behind in reading and writing compared to my peers in my new school. Instead of embracing my differences or working with me to overcome my setbacks, many of my teachers decided there was nothing they could do for me, and I was, for the most part, completely ignored by my teachers and classmates. For the first time in my life, I knew what it felt like to be a square peg being forced to fit in a round hole. I want to add here that I didn't find teaching. Teaching found me. I was on a completely different trajectory, and my college studies focused mostly on contemporary Indian art. In fact, most of the training I had up until graduate school centered around art. It was when I attended graduate school at the University of Oklahoma, all that changed for me. I was teaching an Introduction to Native American Studies course, or what some people refer to as a snooze class. It counted as a general education credit and had a reputation of being easy to pass. So here I was, attempting to get a group of uninspired undergraduate college students to feel as passionately as I did about American Indian Studies. It was while I was teaching this course that I noticed something that baffled me. All, and I mean all, of the Native students in that class did not perform at the same level as their non-Native peers. In fact, most of the Native students could barely write a complete sentence. I was perplexed and deeply moved by this. I would spend hours complaining about this to my dear friend and fellow University of Oklahoma classmate who was also a Teach for America alum. Then I would spend even more hours preparing for class, trying to figure out how to better support these Native students that I felt the university ignored and simply gave them passing grades to shuffle them along. I spent more time preparing and teaching instead of focusing on my graduate studies. Thankfully, I didn't flunk out of graduate school, but I will always be thankful for my time there because seeing these repeating cycles that I too experienced is what led me to Teach for America, and ultimately to facilitate a high school English language arts class on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. I told myself before entering the classroom that I would never make my students feel the way I felt in my high school English class. That is why I'm incredibly transparent with my students. I tell them how hard reading was for me, but how it doesn't matter because I'm a second-generation reader and I'm incredibly proud of that. I tell them that life doesn't have to be either or, but should be both and. I tell my students how they don't have to choose between education and culture. They can have both. They can access both simultaneously, and they're stronger and richer by doing so. My students are survivors. They embody so many of the characteristics that I admire in my own mother. They are funny, witty, brave, and resilient. I keep my students invested in the work they are doing when they feel like everyone else has given up on them and they have given up on themselves. This is what gets me up in the morning. The chance to keep my students invested simply by saying, Mitake Yasin, we are all related. A dear friend recently explained that concept really well, which I'll paraphrase here for you. It not only means that in some case we are literally related, we're family, but also that our experiences and our stories are the same, and in that way we can relate to each other. Although we are stronger because we have linked arms with one another, I must admit that what keeps me up at night is this. Why is it that after nearly 100 years, this second-generation reader is teaching other first- and second-generation readers? Has there been much of a change at all since my own grandmother attended boarding school? What can I do to continue to prepare my students for success in whatever endeavor they pursue? In closing, I want to leave you with my students' favorite quotes. We discovered this while reading Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, which led to doing research on African religion and philosophy. This quote comes from Ubuntu philosophy, which states, "I am what I am because of what we all are." And this resonated with my students so deeply because it is so similar to the concept of Mitake Yasin, we are all related, all of which centers around relationships and connectedness. Now, I would like you to take a minute, and I want you to think of a student, current or past, that might have been or be a first or second generation reader. Because the one thing we all have in common in this room, the way that we are all related, is that we have had the honor to teach a first or second generation reader. And I want that to be what we carry in our hearts today. Because guess what? Monday's coming. And as ugly as that sounds, tomorrow our chariots will turn into pumpkins and we'll find ourselves back in the grind. However, if we link our arms together and center ourselves around the fact that we still have so much work to do, for all those second-generation readers like me, Monday will be a battle fought and won with purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Try to operate this PowerPoint. Great. So our next speaker is Brittany Edwards. Brittany is a 2014 core member from Washington, D.C. She attended the University of Central Arkansas, where she studied English. And Brittany fell in love with teaching and first came to the core while working as a Fulbright scholar in Malaysia. In the classroom, Brittany enjoys challenging her students, really placing emphasis on preparing her students for their roles as leaders of today and tomorrow, and Brittany will talk more about what this means. Brittany is currently a special education and English language arts teacher at Friendship Collegiate Academy here in Washington, D.C. So please join me in welcoming Brittany.
So I'm a little bit nervous about this. And I was telling my student about this yesterday. I was teaching yesterday morning, and my student was a little outraged. She was, Miss Edwards, are you saying you care more about what they learn than what we learn? And I was like, you're right, Walik, I'm okay. All right, so throughout my childhood, most of the adults who I respected the most were teachers. I grew up in a working class family, the daughter of a teen mom who was unofficially forced to drop out of high school after her pregnancy was found out, and a felon who has never been able to break the bonds of addiction. Although my family parroted the idea that school was important, I don't think that they really believed in the transformational power of education. Frankly, it had failed them all in one way or another. Although my family was failed by education, I was not. From an early age, I was identified as smart and tracked into the rooms with the best teachers and taught among the brightest and often whitest and wealthiest kids. I was gifted by a very biased system with the best teachers in the smallest class sizes. My teachers were incredibly invested in me and echoed my worth in their every action. Mr. and Mrs. Briscoe, Mrs. Powell, Mrs. Krishna, Mrs. Forte are my muses. I reflect on them now as I become a better teacher. However, though their efforts were excellent, an unintended message was sent by the very environment of my education. Although my school system served a diverse pool of students, after first grade, I was never placed in a classroom with students with special needs, and as I grew older, my classes became wider and wider and richer and richer. The message sent to me and to the other students in my school was clear. Although some minds matters, many do not. This was apparent to me in the students who I perceived as being valued by my school. Although my school was 40% students who identified as African American, the longer I matriculated through classes, especially the honors and pre-AP classes, the more and more segregated my school became. Finally, in my senior year, there was only one black student in any of my AP classes. As a high school senior, I understood that what I saw my classmates and even my siblings experience was not fair, was not equitable. Contrary to what was outwardly taught, the message communicated was that able white voices were valued and others were not. Although I'd wanted to be a teacher when I was very small, that reality dimmed as I heard the message again and again that teaching was unsustainable and unrewarding. I didn't consider teaching again until after I left college, when I applied for and was accepted to a Fulbright exchange program in Malaysia. If I'm honest with myself, I applied to the program because I wanted to make my family proud. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I wanted to make them proud any way that I could. I spent my first year teaching in Malaysia, where I fell in love with the fire of teaching. In Malaysia, a very diverse country, often riddled by the struggles of race and religion left behind, ultimately by a byproduct of colonization, I learned what it meant to be an other, and more importantly, what it meant to be a white teacher with brown students. I learned that no matter how good my intentions were, I could not assume to know what only my students' voices could tell me. Although I don't think I knew it yet, I was beginning to learn to listen. I learned that in being authentic, I had to teach as my whole white self, and what that meant is I needed to listen. After the year was over, I decided to return to AmeriCorps, where I hoped I could work to teach children without having to navigate so many labyrinths of privilege and racial trauma. I was wrong, and I'm very glad for that. I applied to the Corps in 2014. I currently I'm in my second year at Friendship Collegiate Academy. I don't think that anybody ever describes their first year of Teach for America as something easy. For me, it was no different. As a special education high school teacher, I struggled to learn how to best serve my students and how to figure out my role as a white Southern educator in an all-black urban high school. My students came to me ready to fail, ready to sit through whatever they had to pass, struggling as little as possible. For many of them, success was not even a possibility that they believed in themselves. I, on the other hand, excitedly began teaching with a plan to help my students. I had a lot of plans, so many plans, too many plans. I want to paint a picture of my first classroom. It had 32 students, over half with special needs. My students were loud and passionate, and are loud and passionate, excited, and brilliantly rebellious. Although we learned to value each other, their struggles were real. I only had 2 students in my class reading on grade level 3 months into the year. and throughout the year would need to help many of my students navigate through multiple suspensions, fights, homelessness, and the death of friends and family to violence. It took me many failures to realize that the problem wasn't that my plans weren't good, but that they were themselves imperialistic and were not based on building on my students' own agency. My biggest lesson my first year of teaching was that my first role as a teacher and as a white social justice ally was to listen. Listening alone teaches my students the value of their voices. When I had been young, my teachers had listened to me and had taken my ideas and my perspective very seriously. And to be an effective educator and honestly a good human being, I need to do the same. I shared myself with my students and they reciprocated. This year, I was lucky to come to the classroom with the same students that I began with last year. My first impression of the students as they came bursting into the classroom for the second time, honestly, excited to see the same teacher 2 years in a row, because that's a problem, was just how smart they were and how much they had grown since I had first met them. I also came to the realization that my perspective of them was a big reason for this change. Although my kids had grown, I had too. And what I now recognized as their intelligence, I hadn't always. When I think of their successes, I think of Jaquan, who read his first book, Watchmen, to himself this year, or Talari, an artist who has been excluded from art classes since she was very small because she needs remedial reading and math classes because she has an intellectual deficit. And I think about the look on her face the first time I took her to the newly formed art club at my school. I think of Charlie, who learned that her fire and her passion was better suited in the context of spoken word poetry than in arguments with her teachers and peers. I think of Diamond, who just got into her dream school despite having no address for the University of Wisconsin to send her letter. I'm sorry. These are my stories, and these are their stories. And this is my passion. It is my goal to be as my teachers once were, but for all students. When I went to Institute, the motto was all means all, and I didn't know what that meant until I was in the classroom. It makes a difference. Our students have been taught that their voices do not matter. No one has had to spell this out for them because they see it reflected in every action that we, their educators, and their society make, which acknowledges Black and brown youth as a problem. We cannot expect children to want to better a world where they themselves are expendable. I teach for this reason. It's not enough to teach with good intentions. If we ever expect our students to value our own voices, we must listen to and value them first. I teach for my kids, but I chose to teach because democracy can only happen when there are no silent voices. I teach because I listen.
Thank you, Brittany. Okay. So our next speaker is Jamie. Jamie Ballesteros. Jamie is a 2014 Corps member in Los Angeles. He is a graduate of Drew University, where he studied art history and chemistry. Jamie teaches 11th grade chemistry. He serves as the science department lead. Jamie's very passionate about improving the outcomes and specifically amplifying the voices of students by delivering rigorous, inquiry-based lessons each day. Recently, Jamie was recognized by the White House, and I'll let Jamie tell you a little bit more about himself and his story. Please join me in welcoming Jamie.
Thank you, Sean. So good morning, everyone. I learned the value of education when I was 9 as I hugged my mom goodbye at the airport. That day, she would make the journey from our sleepy island of Negros in the heart of the Philippines to New York City. This would be her first time outside of the country. That morning, I started asking questions as she prepared breakfast. How long is the plane ride? 22 hours. How far is New York City? 9,000 miles. At that age, I could not even estimate or visualize the length of a mile, let alone 9,000, so I started to cry. I just knew that she'd be missing my talent show at school that afternoon. I also knew that she would not be able to help me with homework that night. I also knew that she would not be around to wake me up for school the next morning. I saw that she had been crying that morning too. "Remember, this is for you," she said as she wiped my tears away. But I had a hard time believing her because she was leaving me to take care of other people's children. She had taken a job as a nanny in Manhattan, and I had imagined her cheering for these other kids at their talent show. I imagined her welcoming them back from school with the biggest hugs. But I know now that she made the sacrifice to be away from her family so that she could save money to provide me and my brother with the best education in the Philippines at a private school. My mom acquired a tourist visa in the United States in 2000. Although she wasn't legally allowed to work in the United States, she took jobs under the table and sent a big chunk of her salary to the Philippines each month. She became part of a new breed of migrant workers, Filipinas who left their families to work abroad as nannies, housekeepers, and caretakers. She spent 6 months of each year in New York City. This was the maximum time her visa allowed her to stay legally. Whenever she came back to the Philippines, it was always a celebration. She would bring toys, clothes, junk food, and of course, money for my tuition. I'm forever thankful for this gift. Our lives took on this pattern until my father secured a United States work visa in 2003, which allowed him to bring me and my brother into the country to reunite with our mom. My dad always told me, "People can take your money and the clothes off your back, but they can never take away what you have learned." His American dream has never been to strike it rich or own a home in this country. His American dream has always been to see me graduate from college. I learned the value of this American dream when I was 14, when my dad lost his job and work visa due to the recession. My family and I became undocumented overnight. My dad went from his office job in Manhattan to working under the table at a nursing home, cleaning and transporting patients for less than minimum wage. The hope that I felt from being in this country disappeared when I became one of the thousands of dreamers sitting silently and fearfully in our classrooms. I didn't know much about the law at that time, but I knew that I could no longer get a driver's license when I turned 16. I knew that I couldn't apply for a job or attend college no matter how hard I worked or how American I felt. The sense of possibility that my parents and teachers had worked so hard to instill in me was replaced with a very real fear that my family and I might get deported at any moment. So I learned to keep my head down, and I learned to put my dad's American dream on hold. I was never really able to articulate my experience as an undocumented immigrant until I read Langston Hughes's Harlem in my 11th grade English class. I can still remember my teacher, Miss Solberg, reading the poem out loud, "What happens to a dream deferred?" What happens to a dream deferred? I broke my silence that year and came out to Miss Solberg as an undocumented immigrant. Although my immigration status made me feel ashamed and limited, she reminded me that my family and I had come too far and that our dreams meant too much to be put on hold. "Your dream is not a pipeline dream," she assured me as she handed me a list of colleges that offered merit scholarships to undocumented students. I graduated college in 2014, thinking about my mom's sacrifices and my dad's American dream as I walked across the stage. When President Obama's executive order deferred action for childhood arrivals allowed me to obtain a work permit and social security number the year before, I knew that I wanted to use my college degree to honor the work and values of my parents and that of the millions of other undocumented immigrants across our country. So I joined Teach for America, and I never would have expected to be invited to the White House as a documented teacher, champion of change, a year after I made this decision. This experience speaks to the hard work of activists and organizations like Teach for America who have opened up more spaces and opportunities for dreamers like me. So I teach because there's more work that needs to be done, and there are more spaces that need to be opened up for my students. I teach for my student, Isabel, who needs to know that she can still reach for her dreams of becoming a doctor even if she doesn't have papers. I teach for Jessica, who started putting her head down in class because her father got deported to Mexico in October. I teach for David, who, despite not having a permanent home in over a year, will be graduating college-bound and at the top of his class this spring. And as much as I teach for these students because I see myself in their struggles, I also teach for their parents because I see my own parents in the sacrifices that they have made for their children. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Okay. So I'm pleased to introduce Troy Bullock. Troy is a 2016 incoming Corps member. He'll be a member of the Corps here in Washington, D.C., where he'll teach special education. Troy is a senior at Georgetown University, where he studies sociology. At Georgetown, Troy has participated in many, many community organizations that are aimed at serving his hometown here in Washington, D.C. There's honestly too many to list, but I will share a couple of them. He coordinates a program that basically mentors juveniles in Washington, D.C. and helps them to restore their criminal record and integrates them back into schools. He leads a tutoring program, and Troy's belief and his interest in Teach for America comes down to a deep belief that every student he's worked with who is just like him, only with the difference of opportunities, and he wants to use his life to serve those communities and those students. No further ado, please welcome Troy.
Good morning, TFA family. I'd like to start by saying I'm honored to be here. It's a dream come true, and I'm glad you all could attend. Ever since I started applying to Teach for America, the question had been asked, why Teach for America? I've always wanted to say, why not? But that wouldn't sit well with the interviewers at all. There are many reasons why I chose Teach for America instead of anything else. I go to Georgetown, where everyone wants to go to Wall Street, do finance, or work in politics. To be honest, I could have went to Wall Street and done those things, but my experiences changed me. Quite frankly, I never knew what I wanted to do. My choices were learned. They developed over time, starting when I came to Georgetown. I started out at Georgetown, the guy on the football team, with the dreads, who everyone was scared of. The funny part was, I didn't have dreads, I had braids. They didn't understand my culture. Long story short, I didn't fit in. Nobody was like me, and I tried so hard to fit into this new culture that I had never experienced before. When I say nobody was like me, I mean no one. I met a couple of people from similar situations, but I like to say mine was different, just like anybody else would. My mom was sick with sickle cell, so I raised my two little brothers most of the time when she was in the hospital, which is the reason why I stayed so close to home for college and now to teach. We never had much. We lived most of our life off of disability checks, which many of you know aren't much these days. Dad, who knew he was most of the time? He was there financially, but those finances came from dark places. Let's just say once upon a time, I Googled my name, which we shared, and for some reason, I thought I was going to be sentenced to 17 years in prison because of drugs. Turns out it wasn't me, and now I knew where all the fancy clothes and shoes came from. Things like this seemed so irregular to a student at Georgetown, so I decided to assimilate and forget my past. But one summer I needed a job. I knew a friend who had worked for a program at Georgetown called ASK, the After School Kids program, a program geared towards helping juvenile delinquents get off of house arrest and uplift them out of their respective situations and get them back on track. I realized there was nothing delinquent about these kids. They had just had some issues that hadn't been dealt with yet. In fact, I saw myself in most of them. I was just like them at their age, but some of the things they did, I just didn't get caught doing. I was lucky. I was lucky to get the opportunity. So from then on, I decided to pay it forward. I ended up getting a handful of those kids out of that program and out of the streets. I saw how much easier it was for me to do it than others who had been working in that program for some time, simply because those kids saw themselves in me as well. I thought if I can make an impact like that so easily, so genuinely, why not keep it going? Why should I be the only one that got lucky? I met many kids in that program who were much more outgoing, much more willing to better themselves. The only thing missing was opportunity. I thought of everyone who had helped me, football coaches, and that math teacher, the one who told me, "You are brilliant. You're going to go to Harvard," but not with that hair. They pushed me every step of the way. They created opportunity in my mind. They pushed me to be great. It is because of those influences and the influence that I had on those kids who were just like me that I dedicated my life to bridging the gap within educational equity. Without positive role models and people pushing me, I would have never gotten lucky. I would be back in the streets doing who knows what. Those small people in my life made such a big difference. They saved me from what many students like myself don't get saved from. So from here on, I dedicate myself to being that savior, that influence, that lucky charm who uplifts every student put in front of me. The opportunities in this world are infinite, but they aren't attainable unless they are envisioned. I seek to put vision in my students' eyes and create a way to make it attainable. My students won't be lucky like me because they are deserving, and they will obtain every goal they desire if it's up to me. So why Teach for America? The question for me really should be, why not? Who else is going to do it? My name is Troy Bullock. I'll be creating opportunities in DC next year. Have a blessed day, and let's continue this work for the next quarter century. Also, my mom couldn't be here today, so she wanted me to take a selfie for her. So I'm going to do that. Okay? Y'all ready? It's going to be a video. Cool. Just lighten the mood a little bit. All right?
Thanks, Troy. All right. So, welcome, Kristen. Kristen Payanessa is a 2012 Corps member in Houston. Kristen studied at Northeastern University and majored in international relations and economics. Kristen has taught for 3 years in Houston, where she was in the Corps, and then she moved this year, her 4th year, to Washington, D.C. to be closer to family, where she continues to teach. She's in her 4th year teaching. Currently, she teaches 5th grade humanities in the D.C. public schools. Kristen is currently pursuing her master's in secondary education at Johns Hopkins. And Kristen really enjoys the rewards of remaining in the classroom and is learning as much as she can from her students each and every day. That's a theme that you'll hear from Kristen. So Kristen, welcome.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Sean. As everyone has already said, it is an honor to be here and to be speaking with you all today. My name is Kristen Payanessa. I am currently a 5th grade ELA teacher in DC Public Schools. This is my 4th year in the classroom, and just this past summer, my mother retired after 31 years of teaching. At her retirement party, her coworkers and former students shared so many kind words about the imprint she's made on their lives. Needless to say, growing up as my mother's daughter was definitely a source of inspiration to join the profession. Like my mom, I too am inspired and motivated to help others, particularly kids, fulfill their potential. As a young adult, I saw too many of my peers fall short of this potential. I witnessed countless friends, some of who were academically more advanced and capable than I even was, and others who struggled with school, get derailed by different life circumstances. Too many of them didn't have a vision to go to college or to even leave our small farm town in rural Connecticut. Some dropped out, others sought drugs to combat their boredom or depression, and to this day, I can't understand why they don't see themselves the way that I see them. When I was 18 and left to embark on my own journey to discover what my full potential could be, I was matched through Big Brother, Big Sister with Brittany King, an 11-year-old girl of Jamaican descent who called Roxbury, Massachusetts her home. Once a week, I walked the 3 blocks up from my university to her middle school to have lunch with her. To be honest, those 3 blocks could have easily been 300 miles. Northeastern University's campus is the ivory tower in that part of the city, and just a mere 3 blocks away begins the subsidized housing development that Brittany lives in with her mom and younger sister. Over the course of my 5 years at Northeastern, I mentored Brittany in partnership with her teachers, social workers, and family. We all shared a deep conviction that Brittany had a lot of potential, but that we just needed to help her discover it. Although I still visited Brittany's campus on occasion, a campus that was as emblematic of Boston Public Schools as it can be, under-resourced, crowded classrooms, etc., Brittany's mom permitted me to explore Boston with her daughter, and I'm grateful for that. We would travel down public transportation routes that she had never been on, to places she didn't even know existed in her own city. Thankfully, Brittany had some great teachers who helped her overcome her special education label and find the right high school for her. All I focused on was making sure she could fully, confidently claim her city as her own. That felt so important because if I could give her this confidence, it would open the doors for her to overcome the anxiety that plagued her mother and to pursue other experiences that may be outside of her comfort zone. I knew she couldn't realize her full potential without having this exposure and confidence. Truth be told, in undergrad, I spent hours studying issues and problems that plagued all corners of the globe. I was ready after graduation to just pack my bags, head overseas, and make an impact elsewhere. But after reflecting on what had come of many of my hometown friends, the work my mother did every day in public schools, and what I saw Brittany able to do and accomplish with a support system who invested in her, I realized that the most significant impact anyone can make is in their own community. Joining Teach for America thus felt like a natural next step. This organization represents the epitome of ensuring that no child's potential gets wasted. We're wholeheartedly aware that when kids have the opportunity to access a quality education regardless of their zip code, when they have investment from adults who care about them, kids have the ability to rise above their circumstances. So after the 4th coffee date and upteenth email written by the TFA recruiter on Northeastern's campus, I finally decided to apply. In the summer of 2012, as Sean said, I joined the TFA Corps in Houston, Texas. Had you told me during my first year in the classroom that I would still be teaching today, I would have absolutely laughed in your face. Like so many others who have completed their TFA experience, I was exhausted each and every day and didn't know how I could continue doing it. In year 2, though, I quickly found my rhythm. Parents began reaching out to me directly, kids began working harder in my class, and the community began holding the expectation that I would actually return for a 3rd year. It was during this time that I began to realize that the reason I felt so attached to these kids, the families, and the community is that I saw potential in them, and I wanted so desperately to help them realize their full potential. So I committed to a 3rd and now a 4th year in the classroom. As a kid, seeing my mom grade papers while cooking us dinner and whatnot discouraged me from ever wanting to become a teacher. However, now that I'm in the profession, I realize why my mom stuck it out. The fatigue, the ups and downs of new educational demands was all worth it for my mom, and continue to be worth it for me too. It is worth it because when you're truly in education for the kids, there is no greater reward than seeing them begin to realize their full potential, or even just getting them to the point where they can acknowledge that they have potential and passions to explore. On particularly rough days, on days when I feel so unappreciated, overworked, fed up with the high expectations and little support, I recall my friends from home whose potential was squandered without the help of a team of adults who could care enough about them. Or I think of Brittany and how I only got to attend her high school graduation this past June on my 26th birthday, and on Northeastern's campus at that, because she did have a team of adults who created this pathway for her. Or I think of my mom, a woman who relentlessly worked to ensure that every kid who walked into her classroom left with the confidence to pursue their passions. And so I get up, I go to work, and I tirelessly try to find and capture that potential in each and every one of my students. Now, I will definitely not lie to you. At times, it's hard to find potential in students like Brandon Baker, who would walk in and out of my classroom this past fall, flipping chairs, tearing things down off my walls, and doing everything else but work and read. But I can't give up on them, and I don't. Because kids like Brandon Baker do come around eventually. We're in this work because we know every kid wants to believe they can be somebody. Some, more than others, just need adults constantly reminding them that they can be. When Brandon walked into my classroom before the holiday break, sat down, and politely asked me to go to the public library, I nearly fell down. But you better believe we went that afternoon. Everyone asks me what my long-term plan is. It's common in TFA community, right? And they often say, do you really just want to stay in the classroom? For now, the answer is a confident yes. I view my classroom as a mini community, a community that has so much potential we cannot afford to waste. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Oop, going backwards. There we go. Well, please join me in welcoming Brian Gwynn. Brian, first of all, currently is a 2014 Colorado Corps member. He teaches special education at Harrison High School in Colorado Springs. Brian came to Teach for America through a pathway through multiple branches of the military. He first served enlisted in the Air Force, graduated college, and then joined the Army as a commissioned officer. Following that, he spent 10 years managing an outdoor adventure recreation program for the military, and that directly related to Brian's studies. He has his undergraduate degree from Western Kentucky, where he studied recreation, and he has his master's degree from Southern Illinois, where he also studied recreation. Brian has a passion for building professional relationships with his students and helping them reach their full potential both in school and in life. Brian, welcome.
Thank you. Hey, good morning. So as introduced, I am a special education effective needs teacher at Harrison High School in Colorado Springs. So I just thank you for this opportunity just to share my story. So about 2 years ago, I received news that my position in the Air Force was going to be cut due to budget constraints. I found myself wondering, what am I going to do now? As I've been with the government for the past 10 years, I started searching for new opportunities. My wife suggested, she's a teacher also, that I'd be a good teacher, and she introduced me to Teach for America, and I quickly connected to the mission. So I took a chance and applied, and about 6 months later, I found myself teaching summer school in Tulsa, Oklahoma, teaching third graders in a place that I fought so hard to get out of, school. This was the beginning of an experience I never would have imagined for myself, but has been so rewarding even in the hardest of times. The motivation it gives me the drive to welcome my students to my classroom every day with a smile and a fist pump, with the reasons of why I first did not believe I could become a teacher, let alone provide any benefit to my students. Every day, even now as I speak, I hear this little voice in the back of my head. Brian, what makes you think you are qualified to speak in front of educational professionals? Because you failed second grade and will forever struggle to get by in whatever you do. You see, while growing up, I heard from the people I looked up to for support, my parents, my teachers, my friends, that they were all saying, we're sorry, but you're not cut out for school. You're stupid. You just do not have what it takes to pursue your dream of going to college. So I listened, and I lived up to their expectations. I did not make it through. I did make it through high school, barely. And then joined the Air Force instead of pursuing my dream of college, as I would just fail, they told me. Joining the Air Force felt at the same time like my only option, but I soon realized it was initial action that would later change the direction of my life. You see, in the Air Force, and later as the Army officer, The people around me believed I could succeed, yet they set an incredibly high bar for me, and I met it. When I did, I started to fight off that voice that held me down in school and in life. Eventually, I returned to a place I once hated so much, the classroom, but now returning with a new understanding of what is possible and trying to instill hope and encouragement to provide the support to students that struggle every day, just like me. When a student tells me I can't, or I'm stupid, or school is not for me, I see myself, I hear that little voice in the back of my head and see all those that said I can't. My little voice, my motivation. My first experience in class that connected my story to my students came during my first year teaching middle school in Denver. While working with a challenging student that was struggling with the content, he blurted out, "Mister, you're a teacher. You don't understand. I don't get this. I'm stupid. I'm just going to fail again." At that moment, I stopped class and began to share my experience as a student for the first time and how I overcame some of my doubt, but still struggle with confidence due to not having a strong foundation in my classes when I was in school. The change in my relationship with my students did not come automatically, but it was a defining moment that I learned the power of being open and vulnerable with my students as a living example of overcoming that little voice. Over the past few years, I've learned that I have to be a leader in telling my own story that I'm not proud of and truthfully embarrassed to talk about. The students are learning that I'm a teacher that gets it, and my hope is that my story will make a huge impact in their lives, which is what motivates me and gives me the courage to come back to my students each day, giving it my best. I've been asked by many, how do you stay so positive when you greet challenging students that fail most days and do not listen to the advice I give them? Even though at times I'm not sure of that answer, I comment, it is truly difficult. I make sure I keep reflecting on my own life, remembering that little voice that still exists in my head, and then remember that it took one action, one event, one company, that one step that started to turn my life around. That one action was being selected amongst my peers for early promotion as a sergeant in the Air Force, which was followed by registering for my first college class was stationed in Germany. Something that was never a realistic step in my life until someone, an organization, believed in me, never gave up on me, and gave me the tools and the motivation to succeed. This gave me the confidence to pursue and earn both a bachelor's and master's degree. I truly believe that each of my students has the ability to succeed. They just need one action that will have the power to shift them toward their journey of making their dreams come true. And maybe I will be that teacher that causes that one action step through continued support no matter what challenges come each day. Daily, I look for opportunities to show my students what is possible. Because I know in just one moment of experience, a shift can happen for a student, a shift that changes how they view themselves and why they believe and what they believe is possible for their future. I don't know when this will happen to my students, but I do know it's possible. Together each day, my students and I are on our path to defeat that little voice in our heads telling us we can't. This is why I am a teacher today with Teach for America. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Okay. Next, we have Alexis Montes Torres. Alexis is a member of the 2015 Corps in Houston. He's a graduate of the University of Rochester, where he studied public health. Alexis joined the fight against educational inequity with Teach for America after learning that one of the single determinants of personal health in America is someone's education level. He believes firmly that without a good education, we cannot have health. And when you talk to Alexis about what he hopes for in the classroom and with his students, it's to serve as his role model. for his students. Please join me in welcoming Alexis.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex, and like Sean said, I work in Houston as a middle school teacher. I teach social studies, which was my favorite subject in school. Definitely not my kids, but I'm trying my best. So something that is super, super important to me is being able to have a connection with my students. I want my students to be able to have a mirror to look into. And, you know, when I was applying to Teach for America, I literally said to the people that I was applying with, I said, give me the Mexicans. And, you know, it sounded so politically incorrect because there's people like Donald Trump trying to kick us out. But give me the Mexicans because I am Mexican myself. And that's actually where my story begins, in Mexico, over 17 years ago. And some of the earliest, faintest memories that I have are of my grandmother in Mexico. And she actually had a shrine for the Virgin Mary, and every single night, she would hop on over to the shrine in the living room, sit down, kneel, rosary in hand, and she'd start praying. And usually I just go to bed at night, like whatever, grandma's doing her thing. But one night I got really curious, like what happens over there when she's by the shrine and there's a picture of the Virgin Mary there? And I asked her, so Grandma, why are you doing this? And my grandma told me that she prayed for me, that she prayed for health, and that she prayed for a good future. And I think her prayers must have worked because I don't think I'm supposed to be here right now. I grew up in the US as a poor, gay, undocumented Mexican boy who didn't know about college until I was in the 8th grade. In the 8th grade, I was accepted to a high-performing charter school that based their curriculum around the entry requirements for most colleges. And from there, I was able to gain access to a top-tier university and finally joined TFA as a Houston Corps member. This with no money and no papers. Now, whenever I go back home to San Diego, California, I realized that the people who I grew up with, some who lived a block away from me, were not so lucky. Sometimes I'd like to think that their grandmothers just didn't pray enough. But I know the truth. I know that there is a system out there that eats away at the souls of children and people like me, which are people of color. And I know this because when I was 12 years old, I would get home from school and treat myself with a dose of good old popular culture. And you know, there's nothing wrong with a little Nickelodeon or Disney Channel or Cartoon Network until you turn 13 and you start looking in the mirror. And you start asking yourself why you don't have blonde hair or lighter eyes or a nice upper middle class home in the suburbs. TV in my time taught children of color way more than one-liners. It also taught me that I didn't exist. I realize now that when I was 12 years old, I watched funny shows, and I wanted those funny shows, but I also desperately wanted to see a piece of me, anywhere I could. Now, I hope that you've all heard of Dominican-American writer Junot Diaz. He's a writer who talks about his immigration experience here in the United States. And he talks about this idea of representation and monsters. He talks about vampires and monsters, and how when they look in the mirror, they don't have reflections. Monsters don't have reflections. And he talked about how growing up in America, he never saw himself represented in mainstream media, and how that made him really feel monstrous because he had no reflection. He had no one that looked like him. he felt like he didn't exist. When I finally gained the courage to tell people about my story, I did so in college. And I told them about how I had immigrated to the US from Mexico at the age of 5. And I told them about how I was gay and how I had kept both of these things secret until I was 16 years old. My entire life was a big secret. Now, most people were pretty shocked, some were amazed, but I was embarrassed. I felt like a freak show. I didn't want to highlight these things. These things didn't seem like things that I should be proud of. Now, eventually, I learned about the power of representation. I reminded myself that I also felt like a monster for most of my life. Because like Junot Diaz, I had no reflections. There were no episodes on TV showing boys who were insecure about the way that they looked, or episodes on TV highlighting young people who were gay and lived normal lives. There were no YouTube videos or Vines about being 18 years old and crying in the school restroom because a college told you over the phone that, sorry, we don't fund illegals. And that happened when I was applying to college in 2011. But there were a lot of stories about undocumented immigrants who were stealing jobs, or gay people that were breaking the fabric of America. Stories that dehumanized me and my communities that I am part of. News that attempted to strip me down to a single story that wasn't really fair, didn't show anything about my circumstances. I needed a reflection growing up. I needed a mirror to look into. A good, shiny, clean mirror. I realize that my situation is not very common. I mean, I'm basically a Republican's worst nightmare. Gay, Mexican, undocumented until recently, low income, and very, very, very ambitious. And I'm so fortunate and so lucky that I get to hold pieces of some of the strongest and yet most marginalized communities in me. And soon enough, because of that, I realized that maybe I don't need a mirror. Maybe I just need myself. But then I started thinking about, what if I become a mirror? I could make it easier for a 12-year-old boy who's a version of me right now to live more comfortably, assured that others like him do exist. So what do you do when there aren't many gay, Latino, low-income, undocumented people to look up to? Well, you join TFA, of course. I joined Teach for America because I know that it's my duty as a human being to make it easier for others to exist. It's my duty to give a child a mirror, to be a role model, to give someone a reflection. It's my duty to show students that because I went to college, they can go to college too. And I already see the effects of this today. And keep in mind, I'm only a first-year teacher in Houston, but in my classroom, I have students like Edmi, who just got here from Mexico 2 weeks ago. She's already staying after school every single day. And she tells me this in Spanish. She says, "Oh, mister, I wanna be able to greet you like the way I'm supposed to greet you in the morning, in English." And she always asks me, "How many years did it take you to learn English, mister?" And I tell her, "Well, like about 3 years, Edmi." And then she says, "Maybe I can do it in 2. And I see it in students like Angel, who constantly ask me about my college experience. I showed pictures on the first day. And he insists on asking me if they will actually pay for everything when he goes to school, if he gets good grades. And I keep telling him, "Yes, Angel, The kid says, really, mister? Even your laundry? Yes. Maybe. I don't know, actually. But if you get good grades, you can get a full ride. I promise. I earned one. My students are so powerful. They prove it to me every day. In a world that still offers fractured bits of mirror for them, many who are minorities, many who are historically looted, also referred to as low income, they still show up ready to learn. And today I am here to offer them a mirror. Because in my classroom, I don't just tell kids what they can be when they grow up, I show them what they can be when they grow up. And that's why I Teach for America. Thank you.
We're going to close out with everyone up here on the stage and talking just a little bit. Thank you all. They told me we would barely fit, and I was determined to make it work. First of all, can you all join me in giving these folks a thing? For real, everyone who's been working with me for the last month has been hearing about this session because I'm like, it's just so inspiring to like root ourselves in our stories. So thank you. I think it takes a tremendous amount of work and courage and reflection. So my first question is just, did anyone find it difficult to like share your story? Either the process of like figuring out what to share or the process of actually sharing it. And let's see, I'm gonna have just taking a quick little time check. We'll have time for a couple folks to go. Jamie, it's funny you're seated right here. Can you get us started, and then we'll hear from a couple other folks.
Yeah, so, sorry. I definitely found it difficult because I feel like I came to Teach for America with all these good reasons for why I'm in the classroom, so it was kind of hard for me to narrow them down into like a sequential order. As a teacher, it's also hard for me to reflect on my own practice, let alone the reason why I teach. So carving out that time to really reflect was a privilege, but it was also really, really difficult.
Anyone else?
Sure, I can share. Yeah, it's really scary to share sometimes why you end up in the classroom because everybody has this cookie cutter approach sometimes of why you should be in the classroom, and you just never know, my story, I have so many labels that people could throw on me, and then sometimes people expect me to say certain things because of those labels, but, there's a whole different world going on inside of my head, and I'm sure for all the speakers it's the same way, and for all of you it's the same way. So I think that's the most difficult part is being able to be fearless enough to really say what's going through your mind, and you have to be genuine because your kids know that, like, they can see right through it, and so can all of you. So you have to just be super fearless.
Yeah, I think sharing your personal story is hard with anybody, even people you know. And I think it was more difficult for me because I never really did public speaking and share my story with you guys. I don't know any of you. But I know most of us, we probably have more things we could have shared, so it was hard to decide on what to say. I know for me, I had a lot more I could have told you all. I'm sure a lot of us had more to say, so.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with this experience, so this brought a little closure to me because before I kind of shared with you all, I shared with the loved ones that you hear me talk about, that I still look up for their encouragement, and that's a difficult thing. It kind of brings it to light, but I don't think we can be our best until we accept our stories and being able to be transparent and put it out there. So I think this just made a closure point for me, but it's difficult every time I think about that because I shouldn't be telling that, right? It should be strong. So, yeah, I think that's the biggest thing.
So I'm curious, given that, why do you, just as a person, why do you think it's important to, share your story nonetheless? And I'll put this out to anyone who wants to answer it.
I'll tackle this one. So this is my 4th year teaching, and this is probably my hardest year of teaching. And I think when you do have the privilege to reflect and remember what brought you into the profession, I think it's the only way that you can sometimes just stay intrinsically motivated in it. I mean, this is tough work, and if anyone tells you it gets easier, that's true, right? But then there's always these setbacks. But if you are recentered and regrounded as to why you are here, I think that just continues to make you a better person in front of these kids in the classroom. And actually, just this week, I mean, Sean knows he's been reading all of my revisions. I struggled a lot to write this. I was with my mentor in the Marriott the other day, and I was like, what do you think? And he's like, but why are you in this profession? And I really, you would think after 4 years I could answer that in like a one-liner, and I really just struggled. But because this has been such a tough year for me in the classroom, I think getting back to that why has re-energized me in a big way.
Yeah, I think the personal why is very important, but more so sharing your experiences and what has happened to you and how it developed your why is important, but more so what is important is how your experiences change, how you're going to do this work, and what exactly you're going to do in the classroom differently than what you experienced or what other teachers do. So.
I can share just, our story makes a difference. And my current job right now, I work with students with affective needs, have been diagnosed affective needs, and that's ADHD and a bunch of other. But our story, every day I'm fighting a system that wants to take my kids and put them into a classroom and don't let them go to the gen ed classroom unless I'm with them. And, where I have a very supportive principal that is fighting that, and we have fought it off again this last week. But without being open and telling our stories of, these kids can be successful, then I think we'd lose that battle. So, each one of your stories is for whatever can help you overcome those challenges. And we'll have to do it again, probably in a couple of months. But those stories is what connects, right? And tells us it can happen. So I think that's the reason.
To piggyback off of what everyone has said, when I finished writing my vignette, I automatically thought back to Institute, to when me and my collabs were thinking about the vision we had for our classroom. And as we were writing our visions for that summer, we were just like, this is so stupid. Can't we just start teaching? Where are the standards? What are the objectives? But as I reflected on this, on my past 2 years in the classroom so far, I realized that I didn't really have a strong vision for my classroom. But now that I've reflected on my personal why, again, after 2 years, I feel so ready and so amped to come back into the classroom for a 3rd year and build a vision that's that really focuses on family, that really kind of focuses on the sacrifices and the dreams that my students have made to be in my classroom.
Sorry. Can everybody hear me okay? Is that better? Okay. I think that I like what Troy said about shared experience, and I think that's really important. I definitely encourage each and every one of you, especially if you're a current core member, to think of your experience and how you can tell that and relay that in a story, because it is so powerful. I hold tight to the philosophy of you're never too young to teach and you're never too old to learn. And so even if you might be feeling like, oh, I don't have a lot of experience, or this is just my first year in the classroom, or, I've only been working in this position for X amount of months, we all share an experience, and I think we can all learn from one another, and we're stronger when we're able to do that with each other and for each other, for sure.
I want to close with the question of what do you all hope that the audience will take from this session? And I feel like it's such a gift to share your story so openly with so many folks, probably most of whom you don't know. And I'm just curious, like, what do you hope that the audience will do or take or think about? And also, if there's anything that you hope that the audience will not do or take, I want to give you all as speakers that space to share that. Go ahead, Brittany.
I believe that telling stories and telling your own story is the first step to validating your students' own stories, even if it's very, very different, because that, am I being loud enough? Okay. Because that shows them that it's okay and not at all shameful to have things that are hard for you to talk about. And even very small details about your own experience, it gives them an opportunity to be like, oh, well, Miss Edwards doesn't like to think about this, but she shared this with us, so I know I can share me with her. So I would push you as educators to think about how your students would feel validated if they knew that your space, your classroom, was a safe space to share their own stories.
Well, I think everyone should leave here and think about their personal why, and take that personal why and implement it into your work. If you're not in the classroom, implement it in whatever you're doing, and don't think we are any different because we had some bad experience. Well, personally, I had some bad experiences. Think about the good experiences too, and implement that into your work.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, don't let that student, hide. I tell my students a lot that, I got through school by a lot of times hiding and figuring out a way to make that passing grade. And, my teachers, I can't even recall almost any of their names because they weren't really invested. So, when it's hard, just stop and encourage that student, and don't let them be like 20, 30 years later learning that they could have done other stuff even though their life's going to go how it is. Just don't let them hide. Don't let them skip the lines, cheat on spelling tests, do all that stuff. They're going to do it, but maybe they won't if you take the time to just encourage them not to. So just take that moment, create that opportunity.
I have one. I think that it's super important that us as adults, we know our personal why, but I think it's also good to ask our students, why they're interested in school, or what's their mission, what's their why in life. I did a writing assignment in my social studies class, completely non-related, but I just really wanted to know what my students were thinking that day. And I just asked my students, is school important to you? Yes or no? Why? Why do you say so? And I remember this one kid, he talked about his parents, how they were immigrants, and he wanted to work hard for them, and that he really wants to achieve. And yet he recognized himself that he doesn't achieve very well in the classroom. But through this conversation, I found out that he actually helps his parents out at their business that they have. So he's kind of working with them in a way. And, he's focusing his energy somewhere else, but I would have totally misjudged this kid. I would have thought he's just being lazy, but no, he's helping his family in other ways. So it's good to know our students' stories. That's just as important as knowing our own.
Anyone want the last word? Or time for maybe one or two more.
So as I shared, I taught in Houston for 3 years, and I think I got very comfortable. The families knew me, the community knew me, they knew my why, they knew that I had the energy and investment in their kids. And then I pressed the restart button by moving to DC, and I thought I can transfer all of that here, the kids, the parents, the community, that's just gonna be so much more easy to build because I did it already. And I would say when you do know your personal why, it takes a while to kind of reinvest a new community in all of that. But by knowing it, you're staying true to yourself in that process. And I think it gives you the patience and just the perspective of, and humility to just kind of be there for the kids and their families and their in the community all over again. So I think if you do stay in this profession, if you're continuing in this work, it is so important to check in. And sometimes your why changes. For me, like what I spewed, I guess when I first got into the Corps has manifested in change as to why I'm still in the profession. And so doing those regular check-ins, I think, is crucial.
Last word?
I
Close us,
think-
Jamie.
I think if there's one thing that I hope all of you take away, it's to lean into discomfort, whether that be your own or somebody else's, without necessarily trying to fix it or repair it or make it better. I think we live in a society that encourages us to not be uncomfortable, whether that be through physical pain or anything emotional or mental. We have a tendency to shy away from that. And I think that there's a lot to be learned when we're uncomfortable, not only learning about ourselves, but learning about the power of relationships and how we can lean on each other when we need each other. So if there is one thing, it would just be to lean into discomfort and sit in it, and you'll learn some really incredible things.
Thank you all. Can we give them one more round of applause? Thank you all. I'm giving them the last word, so goodbye. Have a wonderful summit.